Robin Hood and the Golden Arrow, page 66. "It's a fine thing to be a great man," said the Sheriff of Nottingham, "but we have our troubles." "Yes, we do," agreed the sheriff's wife. "Our new clothes came too late to wear to the Lord Mayor's feast. I'm sure that the stone house next door will be larger than ours. What's more, there's that little old woman who lives in that thatched cottage by the forest, and she wears a cloak that's finer than mine. I know it is, for she had the boldness to walk into the church before me, and I felt of it when she came in the door. Oh, it's grand to be great folk, as you say, but even great folk have their worries." "It's worse than a woman's cloak that worries me," replied the sheriff. "It's the bold and sturdy thief that lives in the forest, who's wearing my life away. He's robbed from all the rich folk in town. Why, I have no doubt that he'd even rob me if he got the chance. But I look out for him. It takes a wise man to catch me asleep." "Indeed it does," agreed his wife. "If the fine cloak troubles you, how much do you think the thief who gave it to that old woman troubles me? He's giving fine clothes to poor folk. He's putting new thatches on their roofs. He's paying their rent for them, and carrying them loads of wood when they ought to be out in the forest picking up sticks for themselves. They'll think they're as good as we great folk before too long. I have no doubt that he's already given them white bread and wine instead of oat cake and water." "You cannot catch this thief?" "No more than you can catch the wind. He's here and he's there. If you get him into prison, he finds a way out. I fear the king will think I'm not trying to catch him. I believe I'll go to London and ask the king how he thinks I ought to catch him." "Well, now, I wouldn't do that," said the sheriff's wife. "I know when Jane comes to me and tell me she's having trouble making the butter, I say, 'Jane, you've got the churn, haven't you? And the cream?' And when she says yes, I say to her, 'You have the churn and the cream, so it's your part to make the butter.'" So said the sheriff's wife, but the sheriff thought, "My wife may talk, but I'm sure she was glad to know Jane was trying to make the butter, and was worried enough to ask about it. I think the king would be pleased to know that I'm troubled about Robin Hood, and that I'm not forgetting my business. All men like others to ask them for advice, and for all his crown and throne, the king too is just a man." The sheriff put on his best clothes, mounted his horse, and set off for London. All the way he planned what he would say to the king, and imagined how the great king would thank him for caring so much about a single thief. The sheriff reached the castle. He told the king of Robin Hood's bold deeds, and asked for his advice. The king said, "My good servant, you are the Lord High Sheriff of Nottingham, are you not?" "Yes, my Lord King," answered the sheriff. "And there is no need of a new law against robbery?" "No, my Lord King." "Then you have come to London only to ask my advice concerning the man that troubles you?" "Yes, my Lord King." "Then the very best advice I can give you is to go home and catch the thief. My Lord Chamberlain, see to it that the High Sheriff of Nottingham has proper refreshment and is shown all courtesy." The sheriff bowed and backed out of the audience room. When he was gone, the king and queen exchanged small smiles, and the queen said, "You did that quite well, dear." The sheriff set out for Nottingham. He was surely the happiest man to leave London that day, and he surely thought he was the greatest. But when he repeated the king's advice to his wife, she frowned and looked grave. "Isn't every man that is great enough to ask the king for advice?" he said, trying to coax a smile out of her. "It isn't every man that is foolish enough," she snapped. "What?" cried the sheriff. The sheriff's wife explained that the king had not given him one word of advice, but had only made fun of him. "And now you must catch Robin Hood," she said, "or I fear in another year we will have to leave this stone house, and another man will be Sheriff of Nottingham." The sheriff was thoroughly humbled and terribly frightened. "Whatever shall I do? Will you help me?" he begged. "Your wit is keener than mine. Can't you devise some trick to catch Robin Hood? If you do, I will send to Flanders over the sea and buy you the finest cloak that can be had for money." "I'll think about it," she answered loftily. "And if my own wit gives out, why, I can go up to London and ask the king." The next morning the sheriff's wife woke her husband at the first crowing of the cock. "I've thought of something," said she, "and if you do exactly as I tell you, and don't wander off into something you think is just as good, you will catch Robin Hood." The sheriff promised he would do as she said, so she continued, "Now, who are the best archers in the north country?" "Why, Robin Hood and his men, of course," answered the sheriff. "Did you ever know an archer that did not want to show his skill?" "No," replied the sheriff, "but what has that to do with anything?" The sheriff's wife shook her head. "Why, I should think a bat would see. Send notice all through the country round and proclaim a shooting match. Offer a golden arrow or a silver bow as a prize, and you will see Robin Hood and his merry men soon enough." "But how will I know them?" she asked the sheriff helplessly. "Surely they'll all be in disguise." "I do believe you are still asleep. If Robin Hood and his men are the best shots, simply keep fast hold of the best shots, and you will have Robin and his men." The sheriff was delighted. "You are the wisest woman in Nottingham," he said. "I'll send for that cloak today, and when I deliver Robin Hood into the hands of the king, I shall send to France and buy you the finest satin gown in all the country." That very day the sheriff sent the criers round the north country. They rang the bells and cried, "Hear ye, hear ye! A shooting match will be held on Nottingham Green all Midsummer's Day." In the afternoon, "The Lord High Sheriff of Nottingham has offered a prize for the golden arrow. Hear ye, hear ye!" Of course the criers would not enter the tangle of Sherwood Forest, but there were people enough to carry the great news to Robin and his men. "Make ye ready, my merry men all," he cried, "and we will go to Nottingham and have some sport." Then a young man stepped forward, dressed in all Lincoln green. He said, "Master Robin, let us stay here in the greenwood. The match is a trick meant to deliver us into the hands and prison of the Sheriff of Nottingham." Robin was not pleased. "David of Doncaster," said he, "if I didn't know you for the brave man you are, I would say that this was the speech of a coward. How do you know better than any other that the match is a trick?" Now in the sheriff's house was a pretty serving maid, and it was she who had told him. But the young man feared Robin's anger if he knew, so he hung his head and said nothing. "Let us go to the match," said Robin, "come what will of it. Little John, what say you?" "Let us go indeed, Robin," said Little John, "and if there is a trick, we'll meet it with another trick. We'll wear no Lincoln green, but one shall wear white, another red, another yellow, and another blue. We'll mix with the other men. No two of us shall stay together. And if among us we do not win the golden arrow, we are no true archers." The men went from the tangled greenwood to the shooting match on Nottingham Green. No two went together, and when they mixed with the 1,000 other men, even Robin himself would have trouble picking them out. It was no wonder that the sheriff could not find them. "Ah, well," said he, "it will be easy enough to find them when the shooting begins. I'll watch for a little company that keeps to themselves, and I'll have my men ready to follow them." To be sure, his wife had said, "Keep fast hold of the best shots." But when he thought it over, he decided, "Women know nothing about shooting. It is a man's business to understand such matters. I know well that a bowman does not always make his very best shot. Even Robin and his men may miss. But if I watch for a little group of men that keep by themselves, I'll have them." The shooting began. But watch as he would, the sheriff could see no little group of men that kept by themselves, or were any way different from the hundreds of other men trying for the golden arrow. One man and then another shot. The crowd shouted and cheered. Good for the brown! Blue jacket! Yellow forever! Green's the color! Cheer for the white! Cheer for the white! The red has it! The red! The red! The man in red had made the best shot. He was called up before the sheriff to receive the golden arrow. The sheriff was sorely vexed at not being able to find Robin Hood, but he did not forget to present the arrow to the winner with the greatest pomp. Said the sheriff to the man in red, "You are the hero of North Country, good sir, and an honor to every man that ever bent a bow. May your arrow always fly true to its target." Now, of course, the man in red was no other than Robin Hood. He received the arrow, bowed to the sheriff, and melted away into the crowd. He and his men went home to the greenwood, each taking a different road. Not a one of them was followed by the sheriff's men. Robin and his men met at the edge of Sherwood Forest. They were all merry and light of heart, except Robin. Even with the golden arrow stuck in his belt, he looked sorry and vexed. "What's wrong, Robin?" said Little John. "You won the prize, and the proud sheriff himself called you the hero of North Country. What more can you ask? He never even guessed it was you." "That's what grieves me," said Robin sadly, turning to the golden arrow over and over in his hands. "The proud sheriff will never know it was I to whom he gave the golden arrow. I'd willingly give it back to him, and 100 gold pieces with it, if only there was some way of letting him know to whom he made his fine speech." "Robin," said Little John, "you took my advice before and found it good. Will you take it once more?" "Speak on," said Robin, "speak on. Your wit is as quick as a woman's. If the proud sheriff had but borrowed a woman's wit to help him, he'd have put me in the deepest dungeon cell by now." So Little John told Robin of his plan, and all the company laughed and made ready. It took the sheriff some time to get home after the match, because so many people wished to tell him what a beautiful prize he had given, and congratulated him on what a successful day it had been. He was surely the happiest man to leave Nottingham Green that day, and he surely thought he was the greatest. But his wife had gone as soon as the shooting was over, and cooked the finest dinner that can be imagined. As the sheriff came up the steps, she met him in the doorway, as smiling as 2 May mornings. "I've been thinking," she said, "that we would take the 1,000 pieces of gold the king offered as a reward and make our house as big as the house next door, and maybe a little bigger. Which cell did you put him in?" "Put whom in?" demanded the sheriff a little shortly. "Robin Hood, of course, the man in red that made the best shot of all." "It was not Robin Hood," declared the sheriff. "I watched for him every minute." For a moment the sheriff's wife had nothing to say, a thing that did not often happen. While she stood staring into her husband's face, a group of monks came to the steps with their hoods drawn low over their faces. "Here's a purse we found on the road," one said. "We thought it best to return lost property to the Lord High Sheriff." "Thank you, good sirs, thank you," replied the sheriff, taking the purse. "And please, here is a donation for your monastery." The monk who had spoken took the gold piece the sheriff offered, flashed a bright smile at the sheriff's wife, and led his fellows on down the road. The sheriff opened the purse and took out an arrow, a piece of parchment, and a red hat. His knees turned to water as he read, "This arrow is from Robin Hood in return for the golden one that the sheriff so courteously bestowed on him."